You don't work here anymore.
My father said it in front of nearly 40 employees, 2 reporters from the Riverton Gazette, and a group of vocational students touring the shop. Then he laughed, like he had just delivered a punchline only he found funny. My name is Erin Caldwell. I'm 34 years old, a licensed structural engineer in the state of Pennsylvania, and I had just returned to Riverton after spending 18 months working in flood-ravaged areas of Kentucky and West Virginia. During that time, I slept in cheap motels, ate gas station sandwiches for dinner, and spent most mornings standing in the rain, inspecting bridges people had no choice but to cross every day. I thought the hardest thing I would have to do when I got home was catch up on the Riverton Bridge project. I was wrong. The moment my old pickup turned into the parking lot at Caldwell Civil Works, I saw a new billboard standing almost as tall as the shop roof. It showed the Riverton Bridge, the design I had spent 3 years perfecting. The angle of the piers, the flood control drainage system, the expansion joints. I recognized every line, because I had drawn them myself during the nights when the company had been one bad month away from bankruptcy. But beneath the design, there was only one name in giant letters: Logan Caldwell, building Riverton's future. I sat in my truck longer than I care to admit. A cup of cold coffee rested in the console between the seats. On the radio, the host was talking about the Riverton Panthers game that Friday night, the kind of small, familiar news that made me feel like I was finally home. Then I looked at my brother's name on my project. I kept telling myself it was probably just one of Logan's publicity stunts. He had always been better in front of a camera than I was. Growing up, Logan was the kid riding on the Labor Day parade float, while I stayed behind helping workers re-banners the wind had torn loose. Dad always said everybody had their own strengths. Logan's strength was making people like him. Mine was fixing whatever he broke. I walked to the front entrance and scanned my badge. The light flashed red. I tried again, still red. A young receptionist I had never seen before looked at me through the glass and said, "I'm sorry, Miss Caldwell, your badge has been deactivated." I asked who had ordered it. She looked down at her desk, avoiding my eyes. Mr. Caldwell. I should have known immediately that she meant my father, but for a few seconds, I was foolish enough to think she might mean Logan. When I went around to the shop entrance, everyone was gathered around a temporary stage. Powdered donuts sat beside large coffee urns. American and Pennsylvania flags hung behind the podium. My father stood in the middle, wearing the dark blue company jacket he only put on when the press was around. Logan stood to his right in a suit that probably cost more than my first car. 3 cardboard boxes sat beside the door. My name was written across them in black marker. Frank Caldwell, my father, saw me, but he did not look surprised. That was when I understood the meeting had not accidentally been scheduled for the day I came home. He had planned it. "Erin," he said into the microphone. "Good, you're just in time." The room went quiet. I walked past faces I had known almost my entire life. Some of those people had taught me how to use a welder. Some had eaten birthday cake at my house, watched the Super Bowl with my family, or attended my mother's funeral. Not one of them stepped toward me. My father held up a packet of documents. While Erin was away, the board decided to restructure the company. Erin agreed to sell back her shares and step down as chief engineer. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the last page. It looked enough like mine to fool a stranger. But the E was too round. I had always written it with a sharp break because in 8th grade, my math teacher told me my signature looked like a load diagram. "I never signed that," I said. My father sighed, like I was a child making a scene at Thanksgiving dinner. "Don't make this more awkward than it needs to be, Erin." Logan stepped forward and put a hand on Dad's shoulder. "You were gone too long. The company needs someone who's actually here. You're standing in front of my design." Logan's smile tightened for a second, then returned. "The design belongs to Caldwell Civil Works." A few people looked at the floor. Marcus Bell, the company's longest-serving foreman, gripped his hard hat in both hands. He said nothing, but the look on his face told me something worse was going on. My father pointed toward the 3 boxes. "Your things are over there. You don't work here anymore." This company needs a leader, not a daughter who takes 3 weeks to inspect every bolt. A few strained laughs moved through the room. Not many, but enough to make the words hurt more. At the back of the shop, a young woman in the student group stared at me. I later learned her name was Sophie Grant. She held a notebook against her chest and whispered to her friend, "That's Erin Caldwell. She wrote the paper on flood-resistant bridge abutments." Their instructor immediately pulled Sophie back, but I had heard her. In the room where my own family was trying to erase my name, a complete stranger still knew who I was. I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked out through the shop door. A truck was backing into the material yard. The steel bundles on its trailer carried a manufacturer's code I had never approved. It was not the corrosion-resistant steel specified in the Riverton Bridge plans. I turned to Logan. "Who approved the steel that just came in? It meets code." That wasn't my question. Logan folded his arms. "I did. Under whose license?" The shop suddenly became so quiet I could hear the forklift beeping outside. Logan gave a thin smile. "The license belongs to the company." I looked him straight in the eye. "No, the license belongs to the person who has to answer when a bridge collapses." The smile disappeared from my father's face. I knelt and opened the first box. Inside were my old hard hat, a photograph of my mother, and several engineering notebooks. The storage drive containing the original inspection records was gone. What I had not expected was that they wanted more than my position. They had gone through my personal things looking for evidence. I closed the box, picked up my old briefcase, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Effective immediately, you are not authorized to use my name, signature, or professional engineer's seal on any document." My father laughed again, but this time it sounded less certain. "You think you can threaten me inside my own company?" I shook my head. "I'm not threatening you." I looked at the billboard carrying Logan's name, then at the cheap steel being unloaded into the yard. "I'm giving you one last chance to stop." I carried the boxes out to my truck. Marcus started toward me to help, but one look from my father stopped him. I did not blame him. Marcus was 2 years away from a full pension, and Frank Caldwell had spent 30 years teaching employees that crossing him meant losing everything. As I drove out of the parking lot, my phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. I called Dana Kim, the county's contract compliance officer. She answered immediately. "I saw the steel shipment," I said, "and they're still using my seal." Dana was silent for a few seconds. Then she lowered her voice. "Erin, don't go back to that site alone." "Why?" "The report you submitted 3 weeks ago was forwarded to federal oversight. They formally opened an investigation this morning." I looked in the rearview mirror. Behind me, Dad and Logan were still standing beneath the billboard, convinced they had just removed the last obstacle in their way. They had no idea the investigation had begun before I ever walked through that door. And they had even less idea that the steel shipment being unloaded into their yard might be the thing that brought the entire Caldwell empire down. I did not go back to the old Caldwell house that night. Honestly, I was no longer sure I could call it home. Dad still lived in the red brick house near the high school football field, where Mom used to hang a wreath on the front door every Thanksgiving and bake far too many apple pies for the neighbors. But after what had happened at the company, the thought of walking through that door made my chest feel like a concrete block was sitting on it. I rented a small room above Elena Lopez's laundromat, about a 10-minute drive from downtown Riverton. The room had one twin bed, an old kitchen table, and a window overlooking the Dollar General parking lot. Every night, the dryers made the floor vibrate until almost midnight. It was not quiet. It was not fancy, and it definitely did not look like the life people imagined for an engineer with more than 10 years of experience. But at least no one there could take the keys from my hand and tell me I no longer belonged. Mrs. Lopez did not ask many questions. She looked at the 3 cardboard boxes in my truck and said, "Family?" I nodded. She sighed like someone who had lived long enough to understand that one word could hold both love and cruelty. She handed me the room key and said I could pay the first month's rent late. I started to refuse, but she waved me off. "It's not charity," she said. "My husband used to work at the steel mill. One time the company held his paycheck for 6 weeks. A neighbor bought groceries from 3 kids. People survive in towns like Riverton because they remember who helped them." That sentence nearly made me cry right there on the stairs. Not because of the rent money, but because a woman who barely knew me had shown me a kindness My own father could not manage on the day I came home. The next morning, I started working at the materials lab at Riverton Community College. The school had only two main buildings, a small baseball field and an American flag that was always stretched tight by the wind coming off the river. The lab was at the end of the vocational wing, next to the diesel repair shop. The concrete compression tester was so old that the lab manager had to kick the base whenever the switch failed. The college president was upfront with me. They could only afford to hire me by the hour. There were no full benefits, and he could not promise the job would last longer than one semester. I accepted immediately. After losing my badge, my title, and my access to the company in a single morning, getting paid to do the work I was trained to do felt like a gift. I spent the first week repairing equipment, organizing material samples, and starting a free evening class on structural testing. 6 students showed up to the first session. Sophie Grant arrived before everyone else. She wore an old denim jacket, work boots one size too big, and carried a notebook that was almost completely full. Sophie told me her father was a roofer and wanted her to study accounting because he did not believe construction sites were places for women. He says I'll spend my whole career trying to prove I'm stronger than some 200-pound guy, she said. I handed her a steel sample and asked, "Where do you think a material gets its strength?" She guessed thickness. I shook my head. "It's in the places other people refuse to examine." She looked at me for a few seconds, then wrote the sentence in her notebook. What I did not tell Sophie was that I had spent my entire life being one of those places no one bothered to examine. My father saw how hard I worked and assumed I would always be fine. He saw Logan fail and decided Logan needed another chance. In my family, competence did not earn a reward. It only convinced people they could pile more weight on my shoulders. During the day, I taught students how to identify cracks, test tensile strength, and read material codes. At night, I sat at the little table in my rented room, drank cheap coffee, and compared records from the Riverton Bridge project. Before I left for Kentucky, I had installed a sensor system on the bridge's main girders. Logan knew the data was sent to the company server, but he did not know I had designed a separate offline backup. I had learned that lesson on a project in Louisiana, where a contractor's server had accidentally crashed right after a series of safety reports disappeared. In my line of work, trust was good. Backup data was better. What the system showed made my blood run cold. Several girders were deflecting more than expected. Deliveries were routinely arriving after 10 at night, when the county inspector was no longer on site. Serial numbers in the photographs did not match the numbers on the invoices. Caldwell Civil Works was billing for premium corrosion-resistant bridge steel, but what was being delivered was cheaper material better suited for a warehouse or parking structure than a bridge spanning a flood-prone river. Worse, my name appeared on 17 acceptance reports. Some of those documents had been signed on days when I was standing in a flooded Kentucky neighborhood more than 600 miles from Riverton. I researched the supplier and discovered the company had been formed only 6 months earlier. Its registered address was a post office box in Pittsburgh. Its legal representative was Tyler Boone, Logan's college roommate and the man standing beside him in almost every party photo on social media. Every time Caldwell Civil Works bought a shipment of steel from Tyler's company, the price on paper was almost twice the market rate. The difference disappeared through vague consulting invoices. I stared at the numbers until nearly 3 in the morning. At one point, I had to go downstairs and sit among the spinning washing machines, just to remind myself to breathe normally. I was no longer grieving the loss of my job. I was terrified that a project carrying my design could kill someone. A bridge does not collapse the moment the ribbon is cut. It can stand for months, even years, while rainwater, road salt, and truck vibrations quietly work their way into weaknesses no one can see. Then, on an ordinary morning, a school bus or ambulance crosses at the exact moment every limit is exceeded. Marcus called me Tuesday night and asked to meet at Patty's Diner, beside the gas station on Route 6. He chose the booth farthest from the entrance, where fewer people could see us. His coffee sat untouched and cold through the entire conversation. Marcus admitted that workers had been ordered to remove the manufacturer labels from the steel bundles and replace them with new ones. He had objected, but Logan told him that if the project fell behind schedule, the bank would cancel the company's line of credit, and dozens of people would be out of work before Christmas. "I've got 2 years left until my pension is fully vested," Marcus said. "Frank knows that. He looked me straight in the eye and asked whether I wanted to be a hero or wanted my wife to keep her health insurance." I understood his fear. In a town like Riverton, losing a job did not just mean losing a paycheck. It could mean losing medication, losing a home, and leaving a community where your family had lived for 3 generations. But I still asked, if something happens to that bridge, how are you going to live with knowing you stayed quiet? Marcus looked out the window. A bus carrying the high school football team drove past, its yellow lights reflecting in the diner glass. He closed his eyes. "I don't know," he said. "That's what keeps me awake." The next morning, Frank went on local radio. He said I was going through an emotionally difficult period and had been unable to adjust to changes at the company while I was gone. Logan went even further. He posted a video from the construction site saying that some people cared more about checking paperwork than creating jobs for working families. He never used my name, but everyone in Riverton knew exactly who he meant. The comments came fast. People called me an ungrateful daughter. Others said I was trying to destroy my father's company because I had not been made the boss. A few people who had eaten at my family's table shared Logan's video. I had thought the betrayal in the shop would be the worst part. Then everything changed at once. That evening, while I was backing up the data, an alert flashed on my screen. Someone was trying to access the offline server using an old company administrator password. They attempted to delete the folder containing the steel delivery photographs. I disconnected the system just before the command completed. Whoever was on the other end did not just know I had evidence. They were panicking. Dana called a few minutes later. Her voice was tighter than usual. Caldwell Civil Works had just announced an early completion ceremony for Saturday. During the event, they planned to pour the final layer of concrete over the main girders in front of the mayor, the press, and representatives from the project's funding agencies. "If they cover the steel," Dana said, "we can still test it, but it'll take weeks to get authorization for core drilling and demolition. They're trying to bury the evidence under concrete." I looked at the calendar hanging on the wall of my rented room. We had 4 days. The next morning, I set a box of steel samples on the lab table. Sophie and the other 5 students waited for me to speak. I told them we needed to rerun every test, record every step on video, and send the results to people my father could not pressure. Sophie asked, "Who are you trying to prove this to?" I looked out the window. Beyond the low rooftops of Riverton, the federal building downtown stood on the other side of the river. "To the people who paid for that bridge," I said, "and to everyone who will have to cross it." Saturday morning, all of Riverton poured into the construction site as if the town were hosting a football championship. American flags lined the fence, the high school marching band stood beside the stage, and volunteers handed out free coffee and donuts in cups, printed with the Caldwell Civil Works logo. On the stage were an enormous red ribbon, a pair of gold-plated scissors, and a plaque honoring Logan with the words, "Young Leader Building Riverton's Future." My father had invited the mayor, the district congressman, bank representatives, business owners from around town, and families who had worked for Caldwell Civil Works across 3 generations. People came because they wanted to believe the bridge meant Riverton was coming back. After years of factory closures, young people moving away, and storefronts on Main Street going dark, one by one, they needed a good story. My father understood that. He had always known how to turn a construction project into a story about hometown pride. What he did not tell them was that their pride was resting on substandard steel. I stood outside the fence with Dana, Sophie, and 2 students assigned to document the testing process. Inside my old briefcase were the offline storage drive, copies of the invoices, laboratory results, and a formal notice confirming that my professional seal had been used without authorization. I had imagined this moment dozens of times during 4 nearly sleepless nights. In my head, I always walked onto the stage calmly, said exactly what needed to be said, and refused to let my father force me back into the role of the bitter daughter. But when his voice came through the speakers, my hands still went cold. Caldwell Civil Works has never been just a company, he said. It is a family, and today my son Logan is carrying that legacy into a new chapter. The crowd applauded. Logan stepped forward in a brand new work jacket that had never touched grease. He talked about long nights, hard decisions, and the courage it took to finish the project ahead of schedule. He did not mention my drawings, the load models I had built, or the nights I slept in the office to meet the federal funding deadline. I thought hearing him take credit for my work would make me angry. What hurt more was seeing my father stand behind him with a pride he had never shown me. When the concrete truck started its engine, Dana looked at me. Now or never. I stepped through the fence. A security guard moved to stop me, but Marcus called out from the work zone. Let her through. My father saw me almost immediately. His smile disappeared, then quickly returned when he noticed every camera turning toward us. Erin, he said into the microphone, today is not the day for family drama. I walked to the front of the stage. You're right. This is no longer a family matter. I am formally requesting that the concrete pour be suspended and that every east side girder undergo an independent inspection. The crowd began to murmur. Logan laughed loudly, as if I had just proven everything he had said about me. He took the microphone, turned toward the crowd, and said, "See, this is exactly why my sister is no longer with the company. Erin wants to inspect and re-inspect everything until nobody can finish a job." She abandoned the project halfway through, then came back right when we were about to succeed. Then he displayed a report under my name on the large screen. One load calculation had been highlighted as incorrect. Erin's original design was flawed, he announced. We had to revise it to protect the bridge. Gasps moved through the crowd. I studied the report and immediately recognized that page 4 had been replaced. Logan had taken my signature from another document and attached it to a fabricated version. He did not only want to deny me credit, he had prepared to make me responsible if the project was exposed. I looked at my father. He was not surprised by the document. In that moment, the last part of me that still wanted to believe Logan had deceived him disappeared. Dad knew. Maybe he did not know every detail, but he knew his son was using my name as a shield. Are you finished? I asked. Logan shrugged. If you want to embarrass yourself some more, go ahead. I connected my laptop to the large screen. First, I placed the company invoices beside photographs of the actual shipments. The invoices listed premium corrosion-resistant bridge steel. The photographs showed cheaper commercial-grade steel with completely different serial numbers. I displayed sensor data showing abnormal deflection, delivery times after midnight, and 17 acceptance reports carrying my electronic signature on days when I was in Kentucky. A reporter asked how I could prove where I had been. I opened my disaster recovery work records, including time-stamped photographs, payroll logs, and the GPS history from my government vehicle. To sign this report, I said, I would have had to be in Riverton at 9:12 a.m. At that exact time, I was speaking at an emergency meeting 630 miles away. Logan still tried to laugh. Electronic data can be altered. I knew he would say that. I opened the briefcase he had always mocked for being too old, removed the sealed storage drive, and placed it on the podium. This is the offline record from the original sensor system. Every file contains an authentication hash and a time chain that cannot be changed without leaving evidence. A second copy was automatically transmitted to the county oversight office. You deleted files from the company server, but you didn't know the system had 3 layers. For the first time, Logan's face truly changed. He looked at my father, no longer like a confident executive, but like a child caught in a lie. I continued by displaying the formal revocation of permission to use my professional seal, the patent registration for the reinforcement system, and the limited licensing agreement. Caldwell Civil Works was authorized to use my design only if every material change was approved by me or by an independent engineer. Neither condition was met. The company has also never owned my professional license. Without lawful engineering approval, this project is no longer eligible to continue receiving federal funds. My father snatched the microphone from Logan. That's enough. Security, remove her. No one moved. Marcus stepped out from the line of workers and climbed onto the stage. In his hand was an old phone with a cracked screen. He looked at me, then at the men he had worked beside for more than 20 years. "I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner," he said. Then he played a recording. Logan's voice came clearly through the speakers. "Just change the labels. Once the concrete covers it, nobody will ever see it. If anything goes wrong, the paperwork all has Erin's name on it." The entire site went silent. Below the stage, Sophie gripped her notebook with both hands. Dana presented independent test results from the community college lab, confirmed by a state-certified testing facility. It was no longer one sister's word against her brother's. It was no longer a family argument. It was real material, real data, and a real order. Sirens sounded beyond the fence. 3 black SUVs and several state police vehicles entered the site. A woman wearing a jacket with an official seal stepped out, followed by investigators carrying evidence boxes. She walked directly to the stage, displayed her credentials, and said, "I'm Special Agent Naomi Brooks, with the Department of Transportation Office of Inspector General. We have a search warrant related to federal contract fraud, falsification of engineering records, misappropriation of disaster recovery funds, and obstruction of an investigation." Logan's face went white. He stepped backward and collided with the table holding the award. The trophy fell to the ground, its glass base shattering beneath the words "Building the Future." Investigators shut down the concrete truck, sealed the computers, and ordered everyone away from the east side girders. Reporters who had been filming me minutes earlier as an unstable daughter now crowded around to capture Logan surrendering his phone. My father looked at me as though I had destroyed everything. He came close, his voice low but shaking. "What have you done to this family?" The question hurt more than I expected. After everything, he still saw the collapse of his reputation more clearly than the danger to the people who would cross that bridge. I looked toward the high school bus parked across the road, where several students were still watching through the windows. Then I turned back to him. I stopped my family from doing something that could have killed people. My father opened his mouth but could not speak. Agent Brooks stepped between us and instructed him to surrender the office keys. In that moment, I did not feel victorious the way I had imagined. I only felt relief that the concrete drum had stopped turning. As the crowd began to leave, Sophie came over to me. Very quietly, she asked, "Were you scared?" I looked at my hands. They were still shaking. "Yes," I said. "Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you decide something else matters more than the fear." Behind us, investigators removed the billboard bearing Logan's name from the fence so they could photograph it as evidence. My father stood alone beside the empty stage, looking at the bridge, then the workers, then me. For the first time in his life, he could not use money, power, or the word family to make everyone stay silent. And maybe, for the first time, he understood that the daughter he had erased from the company was the only person brave enough to save it. 3 days after the ceremony at the bridge, the Caldwell Civil Works sign still hung above the office entrance, but a federal closure notice had been posted beneath it. The parking lot, usually packed with pickup trucks, held only a few vehicles gathering dust. The people who used to stand around the coffee maker every morning arguing about the Steelers or gas prices were now gathered outside the Union Hall asking whether they would be paid on Friday. That was the part no one cheered for when justice started moving. When a business collapses, the people at the top are not the only ones who pay. The welder raising 2 children, the truck driver making a mortgage payment, and the woman who had handled payroll for 15 years could all be dragged down with it. I had spent years resenting my father for using employees as an excuse to protect Logan. But standing in front of those families as they waited for answers, I understood why that threat had carried so much power. The investigation found that everything was worse than we had thought. Millions of dollars in disaster recovery funds had been inflated or diverted through steel invoices, consulting fees, and transportation contracts. Tyler Boone's company had no warehouse, no employees, and did not even own a truck. It was nothing more than a post office box, a bank account, and a name created to make money disappear from the project. Some of the money had paid off Logan's Corvette loan. Some had gone into his failed sports bar in Pittsburgh. The rest funded trips Logan posted online with captions like, "Work hard, play harder." The truth was, he did not work harder than anyone. He had simply learned that if he spoke with enough confidence, our Father would stand behind him and turn every failure into someone else's problem. Frank had not taken most of the money. That was the point his attorney kept emphasizing to the press. But he had signed the financial reports, ignored warnings from the accountant, and ordered Marcus to stay quiet after the material substitution was discovered. He did not have to put the money in his own pocket to become part of the fraud. He only had to decide that protecting Logan mattered more than the truth. A week later, my father came to the community college lab. I was helping Sophie inspect a weld when I saw him standing outside the glass door. He looked much older than he had only a few days earlier. The company jacket was gone. So was the Businessman of the Year pin, along with the crowd of people who used to call him Mr. Caldwell. He wore only the old flannel shirt my mother had bought him one Christmas. In his hands were 2 cups of coffee from Patty's Diner. One had 2 packets of sugar and a splash of cream, the way I used to drink it when I worked late shifts with him. "I thought you still took it this way," he said. "I've been drinking it black for years." He stared at the cup for a few seconds, then set both of them on the table. It was a small detail, but it said more than any apology could have. My father did not really know how I had changed. Maybe he had never tried to know. He told me the bank had frozen the company's line of credit. The other contracts had been suspended, and, unless someone stepped in to guarantee the debt, the company would not survive the month. Then he brought up Mom. He said she had helped him build Caldwell Civil Works from one old truck and a rented storage building behind a gas station. He said she would never have wanted to see the family torn apart. I had expected him to say it, but hearing my mother's name still hurt. "Don't use Mom to ask me to lie." "I'm not asking you to lie," he said. "I just need you to make it clear that Logan acted on his own. If you confirm I didn't know the details, the company might survive. The people out there can keep their jobs." "You knew the steel had been switched." He said nothing. "You knew my name was on the paperwork." He looked away. "Did you know Logan was moving money?" "I knew he was trying to work through some financial problems." I almost laughed at the cold absurdity of calling embezzlement some financial problems. That was how my father always talked about Logan. A totaled car was a mistake. 6 figures of debt was a rough patch. A bridge placed in danger became business pressure. "You want me to save the company," I said, "or save you from admitting you were wrong?" He looked at me, and for the first time, he had no answer ready. Finally, he said, "I gave my whole life to that place." "So did I, but it's mine. That's the problem." I told him I would do everything I could to protect the wages, health insurance, and pensions of employees who had not participated in the fraud. I would help the county finish the bridge. I would help retain skilled workers and make sure no one was blacklisted for testifying. But I would not change my statement. I would not say Logan had acted alone, and I would never again use my name to shield my father's choices. He stood up, anger overtaking the exhaustion on his face. "After everything I gave you," I looked at him, "you gave me a place in the company as long as I never asked to be recognized. You gave Logan authority without requiring competence. Don't call either of those things love." My father left without taking the coffee. The conversation hurt, but it also made one thing clear. I did not want to buy Caldwell Civil Works. I did not want to sit in my father's office, put my name on the door, and continue operating the same system that had kept Marcus silent and made dozens of workers believe telling the truth would cost their families health insurance. Changing the person in the chair did not mean changing the way power worked. Dana helped me submit a proposal to the county. Instead of handing the entire project to a large corporation from Philadelphia, we formed the Riverton Structural Cooperative. Qualified workers received ownership shares based on years of service and professional certifications. Safety decisions required approval from an independent review board. Every employee had the right to report violations directly to the oversight agency without going through management. We set aside part of the budget for paid apprenticeships so students like Sophie would not have to choose between school and rent. Marcus was the last person to sign the membership papers. He held the pen for a long time before writing his name. "I'm not sure I deserve this," he said. "I don't need you to be perfect," I replied. "I need you not to stay silent again." He nodded. Sophie became the cooperative's first apprentice. The day she received her new hard hat, she took a picture and sent it to her father. He did not answer right away. That evening, he came to the lab carrying an old toolbox. "This belonged to your grandfather," he told her. "If you're really going into this trade, at least use good tools." Sophie turned away so no one would see her cry. Logan was indicted on multiple counts related to contract fraud, falsification of records, and embezzlement. The friends who had posed with him on yachts disappeared almost immediately. Tyler agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for reduced charges and turned over all of their messages. In one of them, Logan had written that if anything went wrong, Erin will take the fall because her name is everywhere. Reading that, I no longer felt angry. I simply understood that he had never seen me as his sister. I was just another asset he believed he had the right to use. Frank lost control of the company and was forced to resign from the town's Chamber of Commerce. Some people said he was Logan's victim. Others said he got what he deserved. I stopped trying to control their version of the story. I knew the truth, and for the first time, that was enough. The day workers removed the Caldwell name from the old office, my father stood across the street. Marcus, Dana, several employees, and I entered the building to inventory equipment that would be transferred to the cooperative. He watched me for a long time, then asked, "Are you planning to take everything I have?" I stopped on the front steps. "I'm not taking anything from you." I looked at the workers walking through a door that had once forced them into silence through fear. "I'm just no longer letting you take what belongs to other people." Then I walked inside. This time, the door did not lock behind me. 18 months after the construction site was shut down, the Riverton Bridge was finally completed. The morning of the opening was clear and cold, the kind of early fall weather Pennsylvania is known for, when you can smell dry leaves, hot coffee, and smoke from grills set up along Main Street. Families arrived early. The high school band played the same song that had been interrupted during Logan's ceremony, but this time there was no flashy stage, no glass trophy, and no single man standing in front of the crowd claiming all the credit. Welders in heavy jackets stood beside teachers, nurses, bus drivers, and shop owners who had spent the repair period taking a detour that added more than 40 minutes to every trip. I stood at the edge of the stage with Marcus, Dana, and Sophie, looking at the crowd below and trying to understand what I was feeling. I had once imagined this day as a great victory. I thought I would feel satisfied seeing my father's and Logan's names absent from the project. But what I felt most strongly was relief. The bridge stood there, solid and sound, built according to the design, with no secrets buried beneath the concrete. The mayor called me to the microphone and announced that the city council wanted to name it the Erin Caldwell Memorial Bridge. I looked at him, then at the bronze plaque covered by a cloth behind us. A few years earlier, I might have accepted. Back then, I still believed that a name on a sign could make up for years of being erased from meetings, denied credit, and treated like my only purpose was to repair everyone else's mistakes. But after everything that had happened, I did not want the bridge to become another fight over whose name mattered most. I thanked the mayor, but told him the bridge should not be named after me. Instead, I asked that the plaque list the people who reported the wrongdoing, the workers who rebuilt the structure, the students who helped with the testing, and the residents who waited patiently even when the delays made their lives harder. Beneath the names, there was only one short sentence, built safely because ordinary people chose to speak. Marcus stood beside me and lowered his head for a long time when he saw his name on the plaque. He said he was not sure he deserved it, because he had stayed silent for too long. I told him the plaque did not honor perfect people. It honored people who finally chose to do the right thing even when it cost them. Sophie was now a first-year structural engineering student at Penn State. She wore a Riverton Structural Cooperative jacket and still carried the same old notebook. Her father sat in the front row with her grandfather's toolbox in his lap. He no longer said construction was no place for a woman. Instead, He bragged to anyone willing to listen that Sophie could spot a bad weld just by looking at the color of the heat line. Watching them, I realized that change inside a family does not always come from some grand speech. Sometimes it begins when one person stops repeating the wrong thing the previous generation taught them. My father came too. He stood far from the crowd beside his old pickup, wearing the flannel jacket worn thin at the cuffs. No one surrounded him anymore. There were no Chamber of Commerce members, no employees calling him boss, and no reporters asking for pictures. He stood there as an ordinary man, looking much older than the last time I had seen him. 2 weeks before the ceremony, he had sent me a handwritten letter. In it, he admitted something I never thought I would hear from him. He said my independence made him feel unnecessary, while Logan's failures gave him the chance to play the rescuer. He had confused love with indulgence and tradition with control. He wrote that every time he gave Logan another chance, he took part of my work away from me and convinced himself I was strong enough to endure it. I read the letter many times. Some lines made me cry, not because they healed everything, but because it was the first time my father had named the pain correctly. But an apology, no matter how sincere, cannot automatically rebuild trust. I did not run to embrace him. I did not invite him onto the cooperatives board, and I did not pretend our family had returned to the way it once was. I sent a short reply, "I hope you change." But trust takes more than one letter. That was not revenge. It was a boundary. When the opening ceremony ended, the first vehicle to cross the bridge was an ambulance from the county hospital. Then came a school bus, workers' pickup trucks, and families honking and waving to one another. A girl about 8 years old stood beside the fence, pointed at my hard hat, and asked her mother, "Do women build bridges too?" Before her mother could answer, the girl looked directly at me. I crouched beside her and said, "We don't just build bridges. We also decide where those bridges will take people." She smiled as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. I stood and watched traffic continue across the river. For years, I wanted my father to see my worth. I believed that if I worked harder, endured longer, and saved the company one more time, he would finally acknowledge me. But the day I stopped begging for that recognition was the day I began to truly see myself. I did not save Caldwell Civil Works. I built something better from what remained. A place where workers had the right to speak, young people were given a chance, and no one could use the word family to turn silence into an obligation. The Riverton Bridge does not carry my name, but every time a bus, an ambulance, or a family crosses safely, I know I left behind something more meaningful than a plaque. My legacy is not a company, a title, or a last name painted across a building. It is a structure that will not collapse, a community that learned not to look away from wrongdoing, and a generation of young women who no longer believe they have to make themselves smaller to be allowed into the room. Sometimes victory is not watching the person who hurt you lose everything. Sometimes victory is simply reaching a day when you stand in the middle of the life you built for yourself and realize they no longer have the power to decide who you are. Erin's story reminds us that sometimes the hardest people to face are not strangers, but those closest to us, the people who may dismiss our efforts, take advantage of our silence, or make us feel as though our worth is something they get to decide. Many of us have experienced relationships where sacrifice is treated like an obligation, competence is taken for granted, and kindness becomes an open door for others to cross our boundaries. But silence does not always keep the peace. Sometimes it only allows what is wrong to continue. Erin did not win because she was louder than everyone else. She won because she trusted the truth, had the courage to speak up, and understood that compassion does not mean protecting harmful people from the consequences of their choices. As the saying goes, what goes around comes around. But the deeper lesson is not about waiting for someone else to pay the price. It is about asking ourselves whether we will keep living by someone else's definition of who we are, or rebuild our lives with self-respect, clear judgment, and healthy boundaries. Justice does not always arrive quickly. Sometimes it begins with one person saying, "This is not right, and I will not stay silent anymore." If this story made you think, share your thoughts in the comments, or tell us about a similar experience you have witnessed or lived through. Please like the video to support the channel and subscribe so you do not miss more dramatic, meaningful stories like this one. May you find calm after the chaos, strength to protect your worth, and hope that peace is still waiting on the other side of difficult days.